5:58 p.m. in the Aurora Motors Bay, single father Daniel Carter, 35, finished a brake job. He needed the overtime to pick up his son, Leo. CEO Alexandra Alex Hale, 29, emerged from her office in a white suit, her face an Arctic mask. She slapped a file down. Daniel Carter, your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Workers exchanged glances. Daniel froze, his wrench hitting the oily floor. Why? He asked. Alex's reply was curt. You are no longer needed. Clutching his box, Daniel walked out, head bowed. He couldn't know that within 24 hours the entire city would know his name. Daniel managed a strained smile as he picked up Leo from school. The child was a small, bright beacon of innocence. Leo immediately held up a crumpled card, a crayon drawing of them beside a lopsided Christmas tree. Dad, can we finally get that Navy airplane model for Christmas? The one just like the Falcon. Daniel's throat tightened, a sudden, searing pain. He swallowed hard, forcing a nod. I will try, buddy. I promise. The word promise tasted like ash. Daniel's meager savings, always precarious, were now a rapidly shrinking reserve. The end of the month meant rent, utilities, and the ever-present anxiety of the mounting medical bills from his late wife, Sarah's, final illness. Losing his job, especially in the week leading up to Christmas, wasn't just a professional setback, it was an existential threat. It wasn't the loss of salary that terrified him. It was the prospect of having to look into Leo's trusting eyes and admit he had failed to provide the simplest joy. Back in their cramped apartment, Daniel prepared their simple dinner, noodles and eggs. Leo chattered excitedly about his STEM class, about the physics of flight, and his unwavering dream of becoming a naval pilot. Daniel listened, a deep ache resonating within him. He was intimately familiar with that world, the scent of jet fuel, the roar of the engines. But that life was a closed chapter, abandoned years ago after a tragedy he couldn't outrun. He remembered the meticulous, high-stakes complexity of jet engine maintenance, the pressure to be perfect. Now the quiet, repetitive work of car mechanics had been his refuge, a predictable world where small mistakes didn't cost lives. And Alex Hale had just ripped that refuge away. Late that night, long after Leo's soft breathing filled the apartment, Daniel desperately sent out applications. The rejections were immediate and brutal. Each email contained the same unspoken accusation, the same damning professional black mark. Fired from Aurora. The stain of Alex Hale's decision was permanent, making him unemployable. The next morning, driven by necessity, Daniel returned to the Aurora compound. He needed his personal tools, the custom-made kit his late wife had gifted him. It wasn't just metal, it was a physical link to Sarah, a reminder of their last Christmas together. He wouldn't leave it behind. As he approached the chain-link fence, the shop workers, lingering near the entrance, spotted him. They began to snicker and mock. Look who's back! The Navy boy failed, didn't he? Guess fixing cars isn't as easy as polishing a metal. Daniel walked past the cruel words, his silence his only shield. He reached the security desk just as the main executive door opened with a decisive click. Alex Hale appeared, her high heels echoing sharply across the polished floor, each step a declaration of cold authority. She stopped, her eyes like slivers of ice fixed on him. Why are you back, Carter? Her voice was devoid of warmth. I only wish to retrieve my tools, Daniel replied, meeting her gaze steadily. They are my personal property. Alex stared at him for a second, longer than necessary, as if trying to reconcile the discarded mechanic with the man standing before her. She nodded abruptly, granting permission without another word, and swept past him into the compound. As Daniel walked away with his essential toolbox, the chief of maintenance, a man who respected Daniel's work, approached Alex's assistant, Mark, whispering urgently. Are you sure about that termination? Carter was the only one who correctly identified and fixed that severe engine explosion last year. We're losing the best man on the floor. Alex, overhearing the comment, tilted her head, a gesture of controlled dismissal. I do not need people who do not respect protocol, Mark, she stated, her voice firm. But as she walked, a faint line of doubt appeared around her mouth, a hairline fracture in her perfect composure. Protocol. That was always the easy answer. Later that afternoon, driving home, Daniel looked over at Leo, asleep in the passenger seat, his head resting against the window. The child's small, trusting face was everything. Daniel clenched the steering wheel, his jaw set in a determined line. He could lose his job, he could lose his savings, but he vowed to himself he would never let his son lose faith in him. The ensuing days were a blur of cold, desperate work. Daniel tried 3 different garages, each time facing the same immediate refusal. His resume was golden, his skills undeniable, but the black mark from Aurora was a toxic brand. The only work he could secure was seasonal snow shoveling, back-breaking, thankless labor that paid barely enough for rent. Leo, oblivious to the financial catastrophe looming, remained his chief cheerleader. "You're the strongest dad, best snow clearer in the world." Meanwhile, inside the pristine walls of Aurora's headquarters, a crisis was brewing. Alex Hale reviewed the latest reports on the flagship military vehicle project, the Aurora spec engine, and saw red flags everywhere. The motor design was stalled, plagued by complex intermittent failures that defied analysis. The chief engineer, a man known for his arrogance, finally admitted defeat in a hushed meeting. "We are stuck, Ms. Hale. No one on the current staff truly understands the architecture of the older engine generation. Frankly, we need Daniel Carter." Alex stiffened. Daniel Carter. She had always viewed him as a low-level floor mechanic, an easily replaceable component. Now faced with millions of dollars in losses and a looming military contract deadline, she was forced to confront his file again. She reopened his confidential profile. Her eyes widened, scanning the previously ignored lines. Former aviation engineer, support staff on the Navy Falcon jet engine project. Commendation from Naval Command for complex engine repair under extreme conditions. Sahara sandstorm. Alex leaned back, stunned. Why was a man with this record working as a floor mechanic? She whispered, the question hitting her with physical force. Her assistant, Mark, hesitated. The internal investigation found he left the service after his wife's passing, Ms. Hale. She was in a civilian accident linked to delayed maintenance. He blamed the complexity of high-tech machinery, stepped away from the military industry, and sought simple, hands-on mechanical work, something he could control. A deep furrow appeared between Alex's perfect eyebrows. The tragedy mirrored her own upbringing. Her parents, founders of Aurora, had drilled into her the mantra, emotion is vulnerability. Vulnerability is failure. She realized Daniel, too, was running from an emotional wound, seeking safety and simplicity. But her own fortress of control had just bulldozed his. Alex initiated a discreet private investigation, a full audit of Daniel's termination process. She wasn't just reviewing the file, she was interrogating the system she had created. The paper trail led not to a lack of performance, but to a former department manager, David Thornton, who had used Alex's general efficiency cuts order as a shield. Thornton had fired Daniel to reduce his own high labor cost metrics. Knowing Daniel's quiet nature meant he wouldn't fight back or boast about his skills. Thornton fabricated the grounds for dismissal, Alex concluded, her voice dangerously low as she spoke to Mark. He intentionally buried the commendation from the 2019 near explosion and marked his exit as disciplinary. This wasn't efficiency, Mark. It was malice. The realization struck Alex. In her haste to be ruthless and strong, to be the CEO her father trained her to be, she had become a weapon of injustice. The weight of this truth crushed her. That night, alone in her glass-walled office, Alex poured herself a measure of expensive whiskey, but she didn't drink. She looked at the city lights, a cold, glittering reflection of her solitary success. She realized she had achieved everything her parents demanded, but she was hollow. The simple act of cruelty against Daniel had exposed the hollowness. Alex, the CEO who never cried, felt a sharp, unexpected sting of tears. This was the true cost of her control, her humanity. She looked at the internal Aurora security footage from the previous morning, focusing on the moment Daniel retrieved his toolbox. She watched the callous, sneering faces of the remaining employees and saw Daniel's quiet dignity. Then she saw herself, the Ice Queen striding past, refusing to make eye contact, utterly devoid of compassion. The humiliation Daniel suffered was not just inflicted by the manager. It was ratified by her own cold indifference. Alex had spent her life cultivating distance, believing that power meant never needing anyone. Now she felt a profound, aching need to undo a wrong she had personally authorized. That evening, traffic was gridlocked as Alex drove her sleek black sedan through a suburban street. Her distraction was complete until she saw them. Daniel and Leo, illuminated by a single weak yellow streetlight, working on the old family car. Daniel, his face smudged with grease, was patiently teaching Leo how to check the oil. Leo's pure melodic laughter rang out. "You're the best in the world, Dad. You can fix anything." Daniel pulled his son into a loving headlock. "Not the best, buddy. Just trying to be the best I can be." Alex watched the scene unfold. The genuine affection, the gentle patience, the simple shared joy over a greasy engine. The contrast to her own cold, isolated existence in her penthouse apartment was staggering. She sat in her expensive car, a monument to corporate success, and couldn't bring herself to step out. She had stolen this man's livelihood, humiliated him in front of his peers, and he was still finding the grace to be the perfect father. A sudden, fierce desire to belong to that simple circle, to trade her glass tower for the warmth of that single, sputtering streetlight, washed over her. She knew that this was more than guilt. It was a reckoning. She had to breach the fortress of her own making. Alex gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. She whispered to the empty space of her car, the confession thick with shame. "I was wrong, and I was wrong in the worst possible way. I have to fix this, no matter the professional cost." The next day, Aurora hosted the crucial military vehicle demonstration. Naval procurement officials, 4 severe-looking men in immaculate uniforms, stood waiting on the test pad. Alex was there, perfectly poised, but her composure was fragile. Suddenly, a dull thud followed by a hiss of steam, and a cloud of acrid black smoke erupted from the main prototype vehicle's engine bay. The engine was dead. Panic flashed across the chief engineer's face. "We need Carter. He's the only one who can bypass the old solenoid lock on this build. We're finished." Alex's breath hitched. She had to find Daniel. But before she could move, a low, pulsating thump, thump, thump ripped through the air, growing louder, closer. Daniel was shoveling snow at the neighborhood park, Leo happily playing nearby, when the noise peaked. Children ran, pointing upwards. A massive gray MH-60 Seahawk helicopter, the symbol of the U.S. Navy, descended from the swirling, overcast sky. The downdraft lashed snow and leaves in a cyclonic frenzy. It landed with a decisive crunch just yards away. A sharply dressed senior officer jumped out, his uniform immaculate. He walked directly toward the small knot of bystanders and shouted over the dying roar of the blades. "We are looking for engineer Daniel Carter." Every head in the park turned toward Daniel. He lowered his shovel, bewildered. His mind raced, a sudden cold wave of military discipline and fear washing over him. He thought, "They found me. They're going to ask me to come back. I can't leave Leo." The simplicity of his mechanic life was shattering around him. That's me," he managed. The officer extended a sealed document. "Mr. Carter, you are being officially requested by the Naval Procurement Office to assist with a critical engine failure on an Aurora spec vehicle. This is a special, immediate mobilization order." The murmurs swelled around them. "The Navy is calling the snow shoveler." At that exact moment, Alex Hale's black sedan screeched to a halt in the park's parking lot. She ran onto the snow-covered grass, dressed in a high-powered, severe black coat, completely out of place. She saw the helicopter, the officer, and the stunned crowd. She knew this was the moment. Freeze moment. Alex planted her feet and spoke, her voice cracking with strain, but loud enough for the closest bystanders to hear. "Stop! The failure is my fault. I wrongly fired the only person who can solve this problem. I was arrogant and mistaken." The silence was absolute, broken only by the settling snow. CEO Alex Hale, the Iron Lady of Aurora, had just publicly admitted failure. Her staff, who had followed her for years, watched in disbelief. This unprecedented public display of vulnerability was a radical rejection of everything she represented. The fear of weakness, the lesson drilled into her since childhood, was dissolving in front of a community she previously considered beneath her. She walked toward Daniel, ignoring the flashing cameras from nearby phones. Her voice was now, just for him, low and desperate. "Daniel, if you agree to help, please, I need your assistance." Leo, his eyes wide with pride, rushed to his father's side. "Dad, do it! The Navy needs you!" Daniel looked from the cold, beautiful, yet humbled CEO to his son, then to the imposing helicopter. He nodded once. He realized this wasn't about Alex or even the job. It was about the engine, the Falcon engine, his old friend. He couldn't leave it broken. The engineer in him superseded the mechanic. Twist 1, the hero's welcome. Daniel stepped toward the helicopter. As he climbed inside, a Navy technician, a man Daniel hadn't seen in years, stared, then snapped to attention. "Carter, is that you? The guy who fixed the Falcon 9 mid-sandstorm?" The entire flight crew straightened, their faces etched with respect. They knew the legend of the man who saved a multi-million-dollar prototype in conditions that crippled the support crew. Daniel, uncomfortable with the sudden deference, simply gave a slight nod. Alex, watching from the ground, was pale. He was a Navy hero? At the Aurora facility, Daniel, working with a focus and precision the current team lacked, repaired the engine in 11 minutes. He didn't use a manual. He worked from memory, troubleshooting systems that hadn't been documented in years. The engineers had been paralyzed for 3 days. The naval commander approached Alex, his voice severe. "Ms. Hale, Aurora cannot operate without this man. He has a gift and a record that demands respect." He then revealed the official reason for the dispatch. The Navy had intercepted the internal termination report marked disciplinary, and, knowing Daniel's true history, realized Aurora was trying to discard a valuable asset. The mobilization order was a calculated move by the Navy to secure Daniel's services, circumventing Aurora's attempt to erase him. Twist 2, the silent letter. As Daniel stepped back, wiping his hands, the naval officer handed him a pristine, sealed envelope. "This is a special letter of commendation, Engineer Carter. Not for today. This is a late, formal thanks from the families of the 4 pilots you saved during that mission years ago." The letter, Daniel knew, was the real reason he left the Navy. A reminder of the lives that depended on him, in the fear of failing that responsibility again. It was his deepest secret. Alex watched the exchange. Daniel, the man she saw as disposable, was a lifesaver, an acknowledged hero, a quiet giant. She stepped close to him, her voice barely a whisper, thick with genuine emotion. "I didn't just make a professional mistake, Daniel. I failed to see the man standing right in front of me. I owe you a real apology, not as your boss, as a person." That evening, the doorbell of Daniel's small apartment rang. Daniel opened it to find Alex Hale standing there, alone. No bodyguards, no chauffeur, just her in a simple wool coat. In her hands was a brand new professional-grade toolbox, a mirror of the one she had tried to hold back. It was a physical offering of reconciliation, the toolkit representing the dignity she had stripped away. "I know your old kit was compromised," she said, her voice soft and careful. "I wanted to replace it and add my respect. This is not Aurora's money. This is mine." Leo, hearing the voices, peeked out and immediately rushed Alex, grabbing her hand. "You came. Are you staying for dinner with us?" Alex looked down at the insistent child, then over at Daniel, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She hadn't had a proper, home-cooked meal in years. Her world consisted of sterile meetings and catered events. To be invited into this small, warm space was terrifying and exhilarating. If you'll allow it. Dinner was simple. Pasta with basic vegetables, served on mismatched plates. Alex, the CEO who dined at 5-star restaurants, ate the meal with genuine appreciation. She didn't just eat, she savored the taste of home, the scent of oregano, the casual, easy noise of their life. "This is the best food I've had in months," she confessed. Daniel finally asked the question that had burned in him since the termination. "Why did you fire me that day, Victoria? Why the coldness?" Alex placed her fork down, her gaze dropping to her lap. "I built myself on quick, hard decisions, Daniel. My parents taught me that showing emotion was a weakness, a liability. I learned to cut fast and hard so no one could ever get close enough to cut me. I was afraid of everything that wasn't control. I had become so good at protecting myself that I forgot the human cost of my efficiency." She looked up, her eyes glossy with genuine vulnerability. "I saw your grief in your file, Daniel, and it terrified me because it reminded me of my own emptiness. I terminated you to terminate the reminder of human weakness." Daniel's answer was quiet, without judgment. "I understand. Who among us isn't running from a ghost? I ran from responsibility after Sarah's death. You ran into responsibility to avoid feeling anything." The two shared a silent, profound moment of understanding. Both were refugees from pain, one hiding in simplicity, the other hiding in power. Later, while Leo watched an old Christmas cartoon, Alex and Daniel found themselves standing by the window, watching the swirling snow. Daniel noticed the faint red mark on Alex's wrist, where she had repeatedly checked her designer watch during the dinner. She was still counting the minutes, even in a safe space. "You're still on the clock, aren't you?" Daniel asked gently. The question wasn't accusatory, merely observational. Alex lowered her arm slowly. "I don't know how to stop. If I stop, the silence comes. The silence is where the fear lives." Daniel reached out, his hand hesitantly brushing the silk-smooth fabric of her coat. "The silence can also be where peace lives, but you have to let someone else stand guard for a while." He let his hand drop, giving her space. "You don't have to fix everything alone, Alex." The intimacy of that simple, shared moment, the quiet confession of her deepest professional fear, and his immediate understanding response, was more profound than any grand corporate gesture. Alex felt a sensation she hadn't recognized since childhood. Safety. She turned, placing her hand gently on his arm. "I don't know how to do that, Daniel. I really don't." Leo sat innocently between them, providing the unexpected bridge. He started an animated story about a dinosaur in his school project, forcing Alex and Daniel to lean in together, united by the small, joyous chaos of a child. It was a circle of warmth Alex had never experienced. She reached out instinctively and tucked a stray strand of hair behind Leo's ear, a gesture so naturally maternal that Daniel momentarily forgot she was the CEO. When it was time to leave, Alex stood in the doorway, the apartment's warmth spilling into the cold hallway. She looked back at Daniel, her eyes luminous with sincerity. "Thank you for showing me, Daniel. That kindness doesn't make you weak. It makes you necessary. It makes you real." Daniel watched her walk toward the elevator. There was a fundamental, profound change in the way Alex Hale looked at him now. It was a look of recognition, respect, and something much deeper. 1 week later, Aurora hosted a private ceremony to finalize the new naval contract. Daniel was invited, not as a mechanic, but as the newly appointed chief technical consultant and advisor to the CEO. Leo came too, proudly wearing a tiny press shirt, telling everyone who would listen, "My dad is the best airplane fixer in the world." Alex stood on the small stage, her gaze sweeping over the audience until it settled on Daniel and Leo, her eyes softening in a way no corporate camera would ever capture. The former manager, Thornton, had been quietly dismissed and his fabricated records exposed. Alex used the ceremony not just for business, but as a silent, public vindication of Daniel's character. After the ceremony, Alex walked straight to Daniel. She didn't use her CEO voice. Her tone was gentle, almost shy. "I want you back at Aurora, Daniel. Not just for your skills," she said, her voice earnest. "I want you back because you make this company, this environment, more decent, more human." Daniel considered the offer, looking at the immense power she was handing him. "The truth is, Alex, I ran away from responsibility because I was afraid of repeating the past. Your mistake, and the Navy's call, forced me to confront that fear. I accept the job, but I accept it because I believe you'll protect the people who work for you now. I promise you that, Alex whispered fiercely. I will make Aurora the kind of company that values the man who shovels snow as much as the man who signs the contracts. That's my new mission. Daniel smiled, then took a step closer. And what about us? Alex's cheeks flushed crimson. She looked down, completely losing her composure. She inhaled deeply, forcing herself to be vulnerable. The most terrifying act she had ever performed. If one day I want to stay longer than just the work day, stay with you and Leo, would you allow it? Leo, sensing the significance of the moment, ran to them, hugging both their legs tightly. Yes, yes, please, we can teach you how to bake cookies. Daniel laughed, a rich, full sound of utter happiness. He put his arm around Alex's shoulder. Then it's settled. We have a lot of years of missed Christmas baking to catch up on. That night, the three of them were back in the small apartment, finishing the Christmas decorating. The new toolbox sat respectfully in the corner, a symbol of their professional and personal repair. Leo was exhausted, fast asleep on the sofa. Alex and Daniel stood by the small Christmas tree. Alex, reaching up high, placed the slightly battered handmade star atop Leo's small Christmas tree. She turned back to Daniel, her voice a low, emotional whisper. I thought I lost my career, my reputation, my control when I admitted my mistake. But I was wrong. I fired you because I was afraid you would make me weak. It turns out you made me stronger. You gave me a reason to stop running. Final scene. Daniel reached out, his hand gently cupping Alex's cheek. The distance, the title, the wealth, all dissolved in the warmth of the tiny room. They leaned in, not with the desperate need of two broken people, but with the quiet assurance of two people who had found their repair kit in each other. The apartment window reflected the soft Knoll lights. The three figures sat together, the CEO, the single father, and the son, a new chosen family. Alex leaned her head gently on Daniel's shoulder, sighing contentedly. 58, $5. Thank you for letting me stay. Thank you for letting me stay. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, a story about a single act of courage and finding home where you least expect it, leave a comment and subscribe to my Stories.